Welcome to the BizBen podcast, the show that explores all topics relating to selling and buying small to mid-sized California businesses. And now let's join nationally known consultant and author, the host of this podcast, Peter Siegel.
Hi, this is Peter Siegel with BizBen. Today I'm with Chuck Post and Chris Mason, both with PBI Laundry Consulting. How you guys doing?
Great. Doing great.
Good. Thanks for being with me today. We're going to start off today with both Chuck and Chris. And Chuck, how did you and Chris get into the laundry business?
Well, my story goes way back into the mid-'80s. I was in the bicycle industry. Actually, I was importing bicycles and met a gentleman at one of my retail stores, and I was looking to make a change. And he was doing this kind of work, and it sounded fascinating to me. So I went in and discussed it with him, and that was about 1985. And I've been in this business ever since and love it.
Good. And Chris?
Yeah, I came in about 2006, 2007, where I was coming from a bartending background, and I was dating Chuck's daughter, actually, and he had a distributorship down in San Diego and offered me an opportunity to learn something totally different. And I took him up on it and started at the ground floor of going into individual laundries up to learning brokerage and consulting, and it blossomed from there.
A little bit of nepotism there, huh?
Yes, sir.
A little bit.
Fantastic.
But we're partners today. So.
Okay, so
Yep.
You guys are partners today.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Fantastic. So, Chuck, what's your responsibility in the company? And Chris, what do you do?
Well, I'll tell you, we work really as a team with almost every project, and we just take different elements of it. Chris handles a lot of the running around and the paperwork process and examination of various things, and the physical end of the business. He's good in the operation end and that sort of thing. I tend to focus more on the models and the lease and making sure that the investment part of the business is going to stand up properly for our clients.
Good. Now, I know you've been in the business a long time. So what was the business like at that earlier in your career compared to now? What changes have you seen in the industry per se?
Wow. Yeah. The business has changed a great deal because of the types of machinery that we sell and that sort of thing today. We put a lot of big machines in stores. The average size in a lot of laundries is around 40 pounds now, 35, 40 pounds. Where when I started, it was almost all single-load top loaders, 10-pound machines, and then you would have a few of the large ones. And I got into the business in 85 or 86 at a time when the front-load washers on the West Coast, at least, were just starting to take hold. And getting to understand the advantages of those is something that we still argue today. And they're more economical. Customers prefer them once they learn how to use them. And today, the stores are just a much bigger enterprise. It's not really a blue-collar business the way it once was, is as much as it used to be. It's more professional.
Are there more card laundries today than coin, or what's the mix typically of the industry?
There are, and each buyer should take a look at the different opportunities that are available to them. I don't necessarily hold that the card store is necessarily the way to go for everybody. It's an expensive system, and it's not perfect, and programmability in the newer equipment is very good and takes the place of some of that. You can also add card readers for debit cards and credit cards in the machines, and there's also a central location system where you can pay in one spot and they turn the juice on. There's a lot of different systems to look at if you're looking at it. I wouldn't choose a laundry, an existing laundry that way. I would take it in whatever form. But there are a lot of advantages to the system. But again, you're talking almost in the $100,000 range to put that system in.
Wow. So Chris, let's get you involved here. There's some myths I know, within the laundry industry? And is it really that easy to own and operate a laundry? I know a lot of our listeners are probably first-time laundry buyers or entrepreneurs and thinking of buying a laundromat. Is it an easy business to go into?
Here's the tricky part. Yes and no. It is an easy business. Once you have it set up correctly to your management style, whether it's a self-run laundry or you have a full staff of employees, what I find is after you've set up that management style, your time involvement could be as little as 4 to 5 hours a day, 2 days a week. It allows you to have really a fantastic return on the amount of time invested.
Okay, so what is it? Go ahead, Chuck.
I was just going to add, 4 to 5 hours a day, actually, you can scale that down too with proper management techniques, and it kind of depends on how much you utilize some of your staff, if you have staff. So, but that would probably be the maximum necessary for most operators.
So, Chris, going back to you, so what's it like owning a laundromat? And I know we talked a little bit about how much time it will take to run it, but can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so basically, laundries themselves, as long as you nurture the business itself, you're looking at the demographics. You're looking at what's the necessity in the area that the laundry is at. We find that they can be really successful with minimal actual work being involved. And for instance, I have a laundry down in San Diego. I go in, I do my collections. I make sure I have it fully staffed, but I make sure that everything is clean. I monitor my laundry through camera systems, and I make sure that that it's running smoothly. And in turn, I think that helps generate more business by having a clean, safe laundry without my physically having to be there every hour it's open.
Good. And Chris, how do you choose a laundry? I mean, how many models are there? What are the differences? Maybe go through that with our buyer listeners.
Well, I'll tell you, every laundry is different, and we find ones that fit each customer's demographic, what they're looking for. It could be they want a full-size store that produces a certain amount of net, or maybe it's a geographical location. Maybe it's within 5-10 miles of their home. We cater to each individual client. I think that's important because this is a major investment. It's not cheap. This is an expensive investment to get into, but it also can give you the fantastic returns of 15-20% returns if bought correctly. So I don't know, Chuck. What do you think? Add some to that.
Well, I'll tell you. First, we profile the client to find out, where they fit in, and what kind of an investment size they should be considering. Because laundries, honestly, do go all up and down the scale. You can get into it for low six figures, or you can spend tremendous amounts of money for a laundromat. So the first thing is to profile the customer, and our real key is to set them up for financial success in the investment end of the business. The difference between an investment business and a normal operating business is great, and we'll probably get into that discussion a little further along. But I want people to understand one of the most important things is that the laundry model and the full justification of value of the business are based on its anticipated longevity. In other words, you have to have an end game. So when we choose a laundry, we're more concerned with making sure that laundry is going to fit that profile, or what we have to do to change it. So as far as selecting a laundry, it's a little more complicated than just finding one you like and making a deal. You really have to look at all the elements, and there are many elements of value in a laundromat.
Good. And I know the lease is important, Chuck. You and I have talked about this in the past. How important is the lease?
The lease is critical. You can buy and replace equipment. So the equipment, while is also very important, when it really comes down to it, it's the lease. Half of the property, or half of the investment of building a new laundry, is typically in the ground. the cost of the utilities and bringing in the services, and the costs of the sewer fees and the general construction, that sort of thing. Those things are going to stay there with the landlord. And so you have tremendous investment in the ground, and you want to protect that for as long as possible. Unlike other businesses of many natures, like retail and that sort of thing, you can't really move a laundry. It's more like a restaurant or something. It's married to the property. So the lease is critical, and your ability to extend that as far as possible, and the comfort of being able to stay in that location at a reasonable rate is critical to your decision.
Speaking of the lease, do you tend to go to the landlord before it's sold or before a buyer is procured to mitigate any problems in the lease? What's your business practice?
That's a real good question, Peter. This is Chuck. We tend to try to get a buyer to a position where we're pretty sure that they're going to be solidified. We get as much of a feel for the lease and the environment as we can without going to the landlord. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You tend to burn a landlord down. You make a deal with them, and then the deal falls apart. And then you come back to them with another deal, and they're really not always as happy about the idea of working with you over and over again on a transaction as you might think. We like to keep the landlords happy. So the timing is critical, and it's really depends on how we feel about the landlord, how we feel about the transaction going forward, how strong the tenant is, how the relationship is with the current owner. All those things play a point into the timing of that.
So part of your services then would be to help facilitate a new lease for the buyer or entrepreneur?
Of course.
Good.
That's one of the most critical ends. As consultants and brokers, we really rely more on the consulting end. So we tend to do more, along the lines of preparation, work on the model, and prepare the person for ongoing success, as opposed to just finding a store and making the transaction. So in doing that, we have to identify all those areas of the lease.
Good. Let's move over to the equipment side of the equation. I'll open this up both to both you and Chris, Chuck. How does the equipment affect the business model and the value?
Chris, why don't you take that first? Well, that's an excellent question. The age of the equipment itself does affect the model itself. You have to be able to, amortize over a life of the equipment in value. So say you have a front-load machine, you could get anywhere between 12 to 14 years out of that machine. If you're buying a store that has equipment that is 10 years old, well, you have to really figure that they've exceeded the lifespan of that equipment, and now you're going to have a future or a potential investment you have to put on top of the actual acquisition. So it does have a significant role in what the total multiplier is when you're looking to buy the laundry.
Bingo. That's the whole thing, is that we don't really concern ourselves with how old the equipment is when we make the transaction in the sense of selecting a laundry. We do as terms of its life. In other words, the anticipated value going forward of the existing equipment. The funny thing about equipment is, and a lot of laundry owners don't really understand or respond to this, but I look at equipment as I would in retail. I came from a retail background, so I refer to that. If you have a gondola or a shelving unit, near the cash register, and it's full of a bunch of merchandise, that merchandise isn't selling. And you're probably going to liquidate that merchandise, move it, or do something with it, and put something there that is, because that's a crucial part of your success. You have a high profit item and that sort of thing. Well, laundries really, if you think about it, are no different. A lot of times an older machine that uses two gallons per pound of water and doesn't have programmability is disadvantaging the laundry owner to a great degree, regardless of its age. So we may replace a machine much easier, because the net effect of replacing it with a higher performing machine at a greater income stream far exceeds the value of the machine in place. So then you have the advantage of taking it out of there and taking a rapid depreciation and liquidating it and creating a new investment stream and depreciation schedule on new equipment. And you have programmability, so you can do certain promotions that you can't do with the old machine, and you're saving 4 or 5% of your gross in utility costs. Well, that's how we look at it. So I'm not so concerned with the age, but how it fits into the overall model. At what point do we replace it? And those sorts of questions need to be answered. So it opens more questions than it does answers.
Good points. Well, that kind of leads us to then the value of a laundromat. And I know when I talk to buyers at BizBen about laundromats, I hear these valuations all over the board. So let's get into that a little bit, both with both you and Chuck, about how do you value a laundromat? What goes into that?
Well, I'll start this one, Chris.
Okay.
Well, the first thing in valuing the laundry is really trying to get a good understanding of not only its income, but what the market area is like and how well it fits into it. And again, we're looking at the long-term investment in determining the value. So when we assign a multiplier to a store, it's based on all the elements that are in place. So we'll take a standard multiplier, which is pretty well 60 times monthly net, giving about a 20% return. That's sort of a multiplier that people use. But in order to achieve that, we have to take a look at all these elements that may cause for add backs against that amount. And then once we can kind of figure those things out, we can determine the actual multiplier. The multipliers are all over the field. They're and for a lot of decent reasons, but they're confusing to the buyer, and we understand that. And it takes a great deal of effort to make them understand where the values are. The values are really pretty consistent if you melt everything down to the nut. In other words, to what the real elements of value are. It becomes pretty obvious what that value is. And as you know, Peter, that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on. We do a lot of valuation and due diligence work nationwide. So we take a lot of time in this particular area. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to reiterate, the values of laundromats are going to vary based on so many different factors. And that's going to include length of lease, quality of lease. It's going to include age of the equipment. It's going to include the demographics, if the population is growing or receding. I mean, there are so many different factors that actually go into how you value a laundry. So there's not one certain thing. It's accumulation of the analysis that we do as PBI, as Chuck and myself, to make sure that it's a true value of a laundromat.
Yeah, I'll just add also that he mentioned demographics. That's also important because the valuation in a riverside or outer areas and that sort of thing is quite different. Actually, the values are better in a lot of the cases out there per income because of the fact that you have a larger area to deal with and it's less stable and you don't have the density and that sort of thing. So a lot of times you can get better deals if you're willing to travel farther out of town.
Interesting. Well, that comes to then laundromats being known as a quote-unquote cash business. So let's talk a little bit about that angle. Is it true that it can be a cash business? And what are you finding in that area?
Well, my favorite saying that I tell everybody is that the laundry is an all-cash, easy-to-operate necessity of life service business. Okay, what a winning statement that is, and it is a fact, and it is a fact. And the owner of the laundry is advantaged in a lot of ways because of that, and a lot of them are pretty obvious. But for the buyer, it is an issue. The tax records are usually not very good for laundromats. In fact, rarely are very good for laundromats. A lot of them are very unsophisticated in any kind of information. And then, of course, you have a certain amount of overstating of income and understating of expenses and things like this. there's just so many things, and a lot of the answers aren't available through the seller himself, because a lot of these sellers weren't really advised as to the nature of the model and how to keep track of things and that sort of stuff when they entered into the business. So it's complicated. We have a good due diligence system. It's a Cadillac in the industry. We believe I developed it doing expert witness work, which I do quite a bit of, and I developed it with the attorneys so that we could go back in time and demonstrate the income. And this is a use analysis that we use. In addition to use analysis, we also just do a lot of good sniffing around. We go into the apartment houses and take a look at what the challenges are to improve the business based on the laundry rooms in those areas. We drive the neighborhoods and pay a lot of attention to the household sizes and things like this to advantage demographics. So, and we have a good handle on what's going on.
Good. And Chris, what about due diligence? What do you do for due diligence, or what can you advise buyers to think about when doing due diligence with a laundry?
Well, let me first start by saying buyer beware, because it's such a crucial thing as in purchasing a cash business. And just to touch what Chuck was talking about, when you have tax records that don't seem to be up to snuff, when they're showing losses every year, yet on pieces of paper, they're telling you they make a certain amount. This is where the diligence comes in. This is the nuts and bolts of finding out a value of the coin laundry as far as a net versus expenses sheet. And what we do many different things, though. Some of our stuff is very proprietary. We aside from just water analysis, we do demographic searches, we do regional studies, we profile the store itself and all the competitors. We also, just like Chuck touched base, we go into the apartment houses. And in doing so, we get a full picture of what the laundry is really doing at that given time. And then we use the historical data. So we combine all of our expertise into the analysis and the diligence, which then leads to Chuck putting down a model together to go forward so we can set out a plan for our clients.
Good. And then how does the investment perform? And what is the financial model? I know I've discussed with you guys the financial model. Can go into that a little bit details for our listeners.
Okay. The operating model, is far more obvious, and that's where a lot of people are brought into the business because of the easy to operate and that sort of thing. And of course, we've already explained it's not that easy to operate. You've got to have it organized. The financial model, on the other hand, is really the longevity. How do you build the business so that you can gain asset value in a situation where the lease gets shorter every day and the equipment gets older every day, and those are your primary areas of value. So the real trick is to put everything in place so that those are understood and there's a plan to deal with it going forward. A lot of owners will, and I would say if there's a norm, ownership is probably in the 6-year range in my history. That's what I've experienced. Most people own the store in about 6 years. There's a lot of good reasons for that number. You've taken most of the depreciation by then. You've probably built the store as far as you're going to take it without a large investment. And you may be approaching, depending on how old the equipment was when you purchased the store, you may be approaching that period. You may also be feeling some signs of weathering, and you probably know that there's some additional expenses that are going to incur. And that's the time you're going to want to sell it. So for the buyer, of course, we want to identify all of those issues and make sure that we're taking them into account when we purchase it. So as far as the model goes, again, you want to be able to grow your business in the one store that Chris is operating. We do operate stores for our clients at times. We have 3 plus the one that Chris's family owns. And that store was a dead store when we bought it. We had to gut it out, replace all the equipment. And of course, that the investment was a certain amount. But the value of that store today is probably 60% higher than that original investment amount, in addition to the cash stream, the cash flow that he's getting out of it. So That's how the investment is made to work, is that you're advantaging yourself. You're able to sell it for full value or greater at the end. So otherwise, if you're making 20% a year, then you sell it for 6 years later and you lose money. Maybe you're down to 13% or 15% averaged out, which isn't quite as healthy. So it's really important to consider that going in as opposed to later on.
So how is this different than other types of small businesses?
Well, other types of small businesses you can move. So, keeping up the value of a business is more dependent on your performance and your ability to market and that sort of thing. These things are also very important in our business. But in our business, if the lease goes away, so do you. If the equipment's not replaced, now say as a for instance, you have equipment that's 7 years old, and you have a lease for 15 years with no options at the end. Okay, and you accept that. Well, in another 7 or 8 years, you're going to need new equipment. Now, you're not going to have time to amortize out that new equipment without a lease that's going to hold up to that. Now, it may be, so you would say, okay, well, then you go to the landlord and get an extension. Well, how do you know you can do that? I mean, well, you have to factor in that risk because you don't want to sit there and operate a dead store with old equipment for 7 or 8 years, waiting for the landlord to issue you a new lease. So those things have to be considered, up front. You have to. I'm not saying you have to have a longer lease than 15 years. I'm saying it would be very desirable to. And I am also saying that if you don't, then you need to use that as part of your factoring in the value of the store when you first purchase it. And you need to factor it in as to your plans on how you're going to go forward with that element in place.
Good point. Now, on the flip side, let's talk about when the investor or the laundry buyer comes in, they should probably be thinking about an exit strategy. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's pretty much the same conversation, actually, Peter, because your exit strategy has to be planned. I tell our clients that you need to look at every 5 years. You should probably think about doing some kind of renovation, some kind of new model. Make some changes in the place and stimulate it. As I said, my favorite saying was one: the laundry is an all-cash, easy-to-operate, necessity-less service business. The other one is that the laundry is a home away from a home for 1 to 2 hours every week for your customers. Mm-hmm. Now, you have to keep that in mind. And unfortunately, a lot of laundry owners do not keep that in mind when they're operating the store. They're not understanding the desirability of that. And they're vulnerable to a competitor that does understand those things better, taking some of that business away. So you have to put everything in place to make sure that that store continues to go forward, and you have to have a plan of at what time you have to visit the equipment changes. We have a system in place where we monitor the level of the various machines and how they're performing and when to increase prices and what prices to increase and when to replace the equipment and with what and that sort of thing. And we update that for our clients pretty much as they go through their career of ownership. But you have to have a good understanding of where that model is today when you buy it. You can't. How do you buy something if you really don't know what you're buying? And unfortunately, that's what happens, is that people buy these things without a good understanding, and then they wonder why they lose money. And you don't lose a few grand in this business. You're losing 6 figures. So you've got to be pretty darn careful. The return on the investment when we buy into a store is somewhere in the 17 to 20 range. As far as that should really be called discretionary income level. But when we put our models in place and we make the modifications, we like to be able to see a store that can grow to that 24 range. That's what we feel the comfort zone is. So in doing that, we increase the value of the store automatically, and also the cash flow, the discretionary income goes up, and then if we keep up on things and keep going back to the landlord when we need to increase or extend the lease and keep up on those things, then we do a real good job going forward. We're able to get our money back and then some. And when we don't, then those are the stores that my clients are looking for, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes all the sense in the world. What about tax benefits? What kind of tax benefits are we talking about?
Oh, I think the tax benefits are great in this business. Just in the equipment end, for instance, the depreciation of 7 years on the equipment is very good. So whatever your allocated value is when you purchase a store, or if you buy new equipment, that you're going to amortize that over 7 years, which brings you to a good reason to negotiate that allocation fairly in your behalf. Other tax benefits are just, the ability to write things off that may also be part of your daily life, your transportation expenses and things like this. And being an all-cash business, you have a great deal of control as to how you handle these things.
Absolutely.
So the tax benefits are great. We're happy to talk with our clients' accountants at any time to make sure they're aware of some of these things. But they're considerable.
Fantastic. Well, let's wrap this up. I'm going to ask both Chris and Chuck, what is the single most important thing I need to know about the laundry business as a buyer? Why don't you both weigh in on this concept?
Chris, go ahead. Start.
Yeah. Pardon me. I'm going to touch something base real quick. When I got into this industry, it was about 2006, 2007. It was at its peak, and then as the banking market failed and lending dried up, I got to see this business grow. And to me, the most important thing that I saw out of that was, even in a down economy, in a time where homes were being lost, in a time where banks were not lending, laundromats were thriving. And that showed me how resilient these laundries are. It's rare when you see a laundry go out of business. And just like Chuck touched base, that the laundry is an all-cash, easy-to-operate necessity of life service business, it is so resilient that it allows you to have a fairly safe income coming in, as long as you're buying it correctly and you have the right leadership going in. Chuck?
Okay. Well, I'll go back to where I started. The laundry business model and the full justification of value of the businesses are based on the anticipated longevity. So when you get into this business, don't look 5 years down the road. Look 25 years down the road. Because we are going in right now and doing a job in my old hometown on a store that was originally built in 1959. I actually played in that store when they were building it. That's how old it is. It was retooled in 1979, and it's been operating all of this time pretty successfully, but there's so much money left on the table right now. We're going in and we're going to be doing a retool in that store, and the income should more than double, which justifies the additional expenditure 4 times. So, but it's because we're looking down the road. A store with a short-term lease is not worth anywhere near as much as a store with a long-term lease, and people need to understand that going in.
Good. Well, I want to thank you both for being on today's program. If you'd like to see Chuck and Chris on BizBen, just keyword BizBen profile number 26070 on BizBen in the upper right-hand corner, and you can see all their information, their articles, and everything else that they contribute on BizBen. Guys, thanks so much for being with me on BizBen today.
Thank you for joining today's featured show with your host, Peter Siegel, on the BizBen podcast. When buying or selling a California business, franchise, or business opportunity, make sure you receive professional advice on all legal and business matters pertaining to any transactions. The opinions and information expressed by today's guest are not necessarily endorsed by BizBen and Business Exchange Networking. Please join us again in the future to learn, share, and experience case studies, interviews, and focused information on the topic of selling and buying small to mid-sized California businesses.